been thinking a lot about elf lifespans lately, partially because of my totally normal obsession with Minthara's backstory, and partially because I've been watching a lot of Friren lately, and it's gotten me thinking about previous games that I've run. I'm a dungeon master. I run a lot of games of D&D. I don't know if you noticed. But previous games that I've run, players who play long-lived characters, I find there tends to be a lot of difficulty when it comes to backstories and how to fully contextualize a life that is that long before your adventuring career starts. And that's understandable. We live human lifespans, most of us, I'm sure. I don't know if I have any vampire viewers. But we live human lifespans, and we tend to think of things in terms of that. And a good example of this is actually Minthara's backstory. And yes, I'll quit banging the drum as soon as I hear a satisfactory explanation, not a minute before. But Minthara's backstory, and all the loose threads that she is disconnected from, makes a lot more sense when you think of her in terms of a human lifespan and a woman in her late 20s or early 30s. Because she would not have been alive for most of the family drama that happened. And in fact, while I was doing research for that video, I actually reached out to a couple communities and asked them who they might think Minthara's mother was. Everyone assumed Minthara's mother was either Triel or Quenthel, the two most recent matron mothers in House Bayenri. So they didn't consider that this woman is 250 years old either. Because it's difficult for us to imagine. To put it in perspective, if you knew somebody who was 250 years old, they would be older than most countries. They would have been born the same year as the First Continental Congress and like the birth of the United States. That's how old they would be. They would be younger than the country of Germany. Like, it's difficult to imagine how much happens in 250 years or in a long lifespan of a character. So it's difficult for us to contextualize because we're used to human lifespans, right? So I started thinking about this more and more. A great place I've seen this kind of long lifespan contextualized is in the anime Friren. Have you seen Friren? It's really good. You should watch Friren. So Friren is an anime about Friren, an elven mage in a fantasy world that just happened to be in a party that slayed the big BBEG, the big bad evil guy of the world, and is out living her life and coming to terms with the fact that her old party members are all aging and dying while she gathers a new party and continues her life of adventure. I'm not going to talk too much about the show because I don't really want to spoil it for anybody that might be wanting to check it out, but the show does a really excellent job of making you feel what it would be like to live that long when looking through the title character's eyes, and how that long lifespan alters the perceptions of that title character for various things. Like, for example, having to get recertified in magical organizations, arriving in town to find a statue of you that nobody recognizes as a statue of you because it's so worn. Knowing people that lived so long ago that they're legends now, but you knew them personally and hung out together. So what am I on about? Did I take this whole video under the thin pretense of examining an obscure portion of character creation when it comes to very specific character types and use it as an excuse to talk about a cool anime that I enjoyed? Absolutely I did. But also, there's a lot of good things that you can do with the backstory. I'm a very story and role-playing dungeon master, and nothing's better when a player comes in with a backstory full of delicious story crumbs for me to snack on and place into the story and create delicious story meals. And the thing is, when you have a long-lived character, when you show up with a character that's like 500 years old before they start their adventure, to give you an example, that's a whole story sandwich. There's so much you can do with that. And I haven't seen a lot of players fully access it because, going back to what I originally said, it's difficult to fully contextualize. And in fact, as I looked back on it, there wasn't a lot of opportunities that I found where I played with players that had a long-lived character that really took advantage of the fact that they'd been around for so long and it impacted how their character viewed the world and what kind of backstory and history that the character had. It was one character that very publicly I had that did a good job of this was actually Gilbetta. You might be familiar from Mercenaries of Mischief Mercenaries of Mischief. I kind of mumbled the last bit, like I was trying to hide it. But Mercenaries of Mischief, the show I was a dungeon master on for 4 years. Gilbetta was on there, and Gilbetta's backstory took advantage of the fact that to her, she felt very much like her time with that party was a small part of her very long life. And not only that, but she had other baggage from her long life before the party that came up in the story as well. So, what do we do with all this? Well, we can work on some tips to help you craft your long-lived character backstory here. History is going to be part of it. This really only applies if you're playing in the Forgotten Realms. If you're playing in like a homebrew world, you might have to consult your DM. But the Forgotten Realms history is a bit easier. It's better than world history because there's not that many global events. If your character's under 1,000 years old, you really only got to worry about one thing, and it's the Spell Plague. It's the Spell Plague, the Time of Troubles, and the Sundering, which are all the same event. The Spell Plague, Cliff's Notes version, the magic stopped working, a bunch of deities had to walk the earth as human avatars, or mortal avatars, I should be more specific, and a bunch of them got killed as a consequence of it. Huge sections of Toril got tore up. In fact, if you take a look at that ripped out section in Neverwinter, that's what that's all about. And ancient wizard civilization invaded the desert as shadow wraiths. Kind of fun. Look it up sometimes. I get a lot of my research from Forgotten Realms wiki, and that's a great place to go look this up. And if you don't want to look it up, bug me in the comments to make a video about it. I'd love to cover the Spell Plague. Sure, why not? Let's do it. Anyways, what the hell was I talking about? Right, history. So, okay, that's our world history stuff. And honestly, it's not even really that old. It's like 100 years old. That stuff all happened in like 1390 DR, and most of the Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, most of the 5th edition stuff is set about 1480 DR, 1490 DR. Time in D&D is weird. I could do a whole video about that, and God, I'm thinking about it because it bugs me as a dungeon man. I don't know if it bugs anybody else. This might just be a me thing, but I'm okay with that. That's fine. So, anyways, it's not that far long ago, but if you're like more than 100 years old, you think about what your character was doing during the Time of Troubles and the Spell Plague. They probably weren't involved in like any of the major conflicts unless you wanted them to be, but beyond that, they would have just had a time where magic didn't work and it was bad for a while. Maybe they met a god and didn't know it. I don't know, whatever, have fun with it. But after the world history is put aside, which thank goodness you don't have to remember much, personal histories. You know, much like politics, personal, everything's local, right? So you think about what your character has been doing for all that time before they became an adventurer, before they started their career. And this can be difficult to think about because obviously you weren't a great hero before you became a level 1 mage or whatever. You did other things. And it's difficult to imagine a kind of life of mundanity that happened for hundreds of years. But you just gotta get creative with it. And the thing is, like, we know from the Legends of Drizzt stories, which I also covered in a video that you should watch if you're interested in that kind of thing, elves mature about the same rate as humans, and turns out so do dwarves, so do Aasimar. Everybody matures at the same rate as humans, I guess. So you got a lot of life to live. Your character started their life at 16 to 20 years old, depending on how nice their obviously dead parents were. So there's a lot you can do with that lifespan without, trying to justify why your character's still level 1. Maybe you were a faith leader. Maybe you worked in a grand temple. Maybe you healed the sick and you were beloved by all the townspeople. And one day you left for supplies and the whole place got destroyed. and the party comes along one day and finds a statue in a ruined temple of your character. What an incredible hook. Or maybe you're just running a general store or an apothecary, and you worked there for years and years and years. And, you know, maybe something terrible happened, or maybe it didn't. Maybe you passed the shop on to somebody else and you just come across it later. And that's a neat thing that happens in your story. It doesn't always have to be tragic. But if you want to make a tragic backstory, your long-lived character could have like 5 tragic backstories. They've got time for it. A good thing to do is think about what your past relationships might have been. Did you have another adventuring party that you traveled with for a few years, but you guys never really got anywhere? That's why you're still level 1. There's a lot you can do to fill it in, but get creative and have some fun with it. And it's not without pitfalls, of course. Obviously, you know, your character doesn't know everybody important from history, wasn't at every major historical event. Do not Forrest Gump this. Alright, this is the Forrest Gump problem, where they're just... they just happened to be there for everything major that happened, and they met every important person. I grew up in the 90s. I never met Jim Carrey, and I never met Bill Clinton, all right? So that's just what happened. So avoid that pitfall. Try not to make yourself Forrest Gump, the guy who always just happened to be in the right place at the right time to meet every major historical figure and every right historical event. Keep it fun, keep it local, keep it personal. And then it's a lot easier for your Dungeon Master to kind of integrate that into the campaign and have fun with it. Make it a part of your story. So all my rambling aside, what can we take away from this? Well, number one, it's difficult to contextualize fully what would happen in the lifespan of a very long-lived character. But if you kind of take yourself out of your normal way of thinking, you can find some really interesting ways to add some neat plot hooks to your stories and your personal character background while you're building your character. Try not to fall into the plot hole of Forrest Gumping your character, and be mindful of any major historical stuff that your DM wants you to be aware of. Other than that, you really only got to think about where you were during the Spell Plague if you're in the Forgotten Realms. That's about it. So, yeah, I thought this was interesting. Watch Friren. Also, go to the website that I said earlier, the one there, Forgotten Realms Wiki. That's the one. Go to that one and look at the story. They got a great timeline in there. Or if you don't want that, tell me in the comments. You want me to talk about stuff in the timeline. That works too. Like and subscribe to the video. We'll talk to you guys next time. And until then, puck out.